Hi, welcome to Grill Keys Around the Globe. Normally I record this introduction before I start cooking. In this case though, I want to record it afterwards because I was trying out an experimental cook, testing a theory I'd had, and it came out fantastically. It made a Barrato brisket, a select cut brisket, a cheap brisket, you know, be one of the best briskets I've ever cooked. Prime, choice, whatever it was fantastic. So I wanted to sort of tell you about that and say this method seems to really work. It's called the Changon Method. It's basically hot, dry and fast initially, and then long, wet and slow for the rest of the cook. So hot, dry, fast, long, wet and slow. Let's get on with it. Cheers. Sorry. So, just a quick recap. The American grading system on beef is you've got prime at the top of the range, you've got choice in the middle, and then the irony of select is everything that really wasn't choice or prime. So essentially a select is unselected. But, you know, if you're going to choose it and you're going to get it, you're going to take advantage of the good price you get on select, you still want to check the same things when it comes to a brisket. So when it's in the bag, you're looking at it, has it been reasonably evenly cut and not tapered, because it's automatically going to taper because of the shape of the meat. However, it can get very thin. You want to make sure there's not too much fat on it, right, on the fat cap, because you can be trimming most of that off. Next thing, does it bend? If it bends relatively easily, then there's not too much fat in the decal. Sometimes you get a very hard fat band from there, and of course you're going to be paying for that fat band if, you know, regardless, because you're buying it in the bag. So, and then you're just going to chop it off. So you want to make sure that fat band is not on it. So you just got to trim it off. Okay. So this one's got a relatively small fat band, bends well, not too thick fat cap, and the final thing is how much fat can you see in the striations? The striations of the meat as you look at the flat. Hopefully you can see a lot of the intramuscular fat in those striations. With those few things in mind, you should be good. Final thing is, now I'm going to trim it up, the fat cap down to about 1/4 inch, cut away as much of that fat that's in the decal as possible, which is the hard fat in the bottom. The reason being is that you won't be able to eat it, you won't be able to render it away. Cut it off. Simple as that. And give it a general tidy. This actually looks very neatly cut. I've had it chilling in the fridge because the fat on top of the brisket is much easier to trim if it's chilled, if it's cool. Once it gets sort of approaching room temperature, or even really sort of mid-50s, it starts to get very soft and quite hard to cut. So that's basically it. I'm going to trim it up, stick it on the barbecue. Okay, so while we've got lots of time when we're waiting for the brisket to cook, let's talk about this the theory that we're testing here, the hypothesis. All right. Really what it boils down to is this: I want to make the stool as long as possible, as opposed to being as short or something to get through, deliberately making the stool as long as possible. Here's what I'm basing it on. This shows the sort of classic temperature time graph of cooking the brisket, or even pulled pork or whatever. You get a initial sharp rise in temperature, you hit the stool, it stays there for a long time, and then it rises quickly in the last couple of hours of cooking to get to that, you know, 200, 203 that you're looking for. Alright, what's going on? Well, in this first phase, it's just heating up. And what's the stall when it hits here? This is when basically the meat starts sweating, and then you get evaporation off the surface of the meat, which is keeping it at a stable temperature. Once all the moisture, or a substantial portion of the moisture, has evaporated off the meat, it's migrated from the center to the outside, evaporated off, and you've hit a tipping point, then the meat starts heating up again, getting it to that concluding cooking temperature. So, stall period through here. There's one other thing going on. or there's multiple other things going on, but the one we want to focus on is the denudation of the protein. So you've got the collagen, which is the kind of gristle that bonds together the parts of the muscles, breaking down into gelatin. The meat that you actually eat, as you know, is actually quite dry from a pure water standpoint, but it gets that moist feel because of the gelatin. Now, with a select cut, with a prime cut, you've got a lot of fat in there, a lot of intramuscular fat, you've still got the same collagen, and you've got a lot of moisture, so you've got a lot of things that give you that moist feel when it gets to its cooked temperature. With the select cut, the marbling's not quite as good, so you don't have that fat presence to give you a bit of cover if the collagen has not transferred to gelatin. So, gelatin breaks down, the collagen starts breaking down to gelatin at about that 145, 150 degrees, and it will just keep going. Now I presume it stops once you get past that cooking point, or the gelatin itself then breaks down into something else and it loses that mouthfeel, so hence overcooked meat does taste dry again. So it seems to be there's a sweet spot, at least that's my hypothesis. And that sweet spot is during the stall. So you're at a temperature 155, 160, 165, where the collagen is actively breaking down. So with a select cut, without the same level of marbling, and perhaps with a lower moisture content possibly, I want to maximise, make sure as much of that collagen has broken into gelatin as possible to get as moist as possible cut at the end. Okay, so how do we make the stall as long as possible? Well, if this marks a tipping point of evaporation of water off the top of the meat, where enough has evaporated that the meat can carry on being heated, we obviously want to push this point as far that way as possible. If this just marks a increase in temperature in the meat, where some water is going to get evaporated, but we're evaporating water without correspondingly breaking down collagen into gelatin, then we want to shrink this piece to make it as short as possible. So that's my hypothesis. So what I'm going to do is, this section I'm going to do at as close to 400 degrees as I can get there. Because what I want to do is get that meat to 145, 150 as fast as humanly possible in the grill. Then I'm going to make the temperature plummet as soon as the meat temperature gets to 150. Then I'm looking for that 200 to 225 temperature. The way I'm going to do that is by A, trimming back the vents, 1, and then 2, this is when I'm adding water into the griller kit, and I'm going to be adding cold water so that all of the excess energy coming off the charcoal that was lit to get that hot temperature is hopefully now being used to heat the water, create the steam, and create a very humid environment. And that humid environment is going to inhibit the evaporation of water off the surface of the meat to some degree, and obviously it's going to create a nice humid environment, hopefully for developing that pronounced smoke ring that we're looking for. So dropping at the temperature as soon as the meat gets to that 150, and then trying to keep it in that range for as long as possible. Once it gets to here, I'm going to wrap it, keep it at the 225 temperature range, and then just try and make this rise as long as possible. But using the wrap then just to keep it as moist as possible through that last stage. So that's it of itself. Get the meat to its temperature as fast as possible, keep it in the stall for as long as possible, and then finally wrap it and finish it at its normal finishing point. Let's see how this goes. Okay, so this is it after 2 hours. You can see it's sort of pulled up some fluid on the top there, some of the juice out. I've just turned it over, so it was this is the fat cap side, and the fat cap is now on top, and we're hopefully entering a long period where the meat is going to sit in that sort of 160 to 175 range, and I say once it gets to 175, once it gets to 175, 180, that's when I'm going to wrap it, and so take it slowly up to 200. Okay, so you've had about 3 hours at the stall temperatures. It just looks gorgeous. I mean, it looks a deep red, but you know, it's starting to get a bit soft, but definite firmness. It's still only at 155 in the middle of the flat. It's been holding a rock solid 225 or so at the grate. I mean, it hasn't varied at all. I'm just going to let it go. Let it go. My daughter's playing out on the piano, it's driving me crazy. So it's been sitting in that 150 to 170 for about the best part of 8 hours. Now it's suddenly started shooting up, you know, the 175, 178, 179, so it's probably got to the end of that evaporative process. So what I'm going to do now is wrap it to take it back up to the 203. I will say, before I lose my paper, I will say, actually, there's a certain softness to it which makes me a little hopeful this might just work. I'm wrapping it in craft paper. Using the brown paper specifically because it does allow it to breathe, that evaporation to continue, and maintains the crust. If you wrap it in foil, it works terrifically, but it traps in all the moisture, steaming it, and then of course that moisture then, you know, sort of lifts off a lot of the bark, and so I think this just gives a better bark. So, a mere 14.5 hours later, hit the 200 degrees. This has just come straight off. I haven't had a look. It does feel pretty pliable though, I've got to say. Obviously, soaked a fair amount of fat into there. I'm just going to have a look. Let's just tear it open. Still pretty hot. See how the bark was preserved by the paper rather than being washed away that it would have been had this been foil. Okay. We've got a beautiful black coloration. The fat cap's on the bottom. Still see a little bit of the grains running this way, so I'll try coming across here. I like cut easily. It's looking pretty good actually. Oh. Hopefully you can see that. Normally I'd write off this first little cut, second cut. That's really good. Oh yeah. Okay, so hopefully you can see this clearly. Okay, hopefully you can see this clearly. We've got a beautiful smoke ring. Two is deliciously moist. Three, it's got that pull apart. Might even be and I would expect it to start getting better the further towards the point we get. Through the middle here, obviously you expect to have your sort of competition slices where it's going to be as good as it's going to get. I would normally expect that corner to be a little bit touch and go, but it really does look quite gorgeous. Quite gorgeous. Okay, so one of these first slices, very juicy, beautiful smoke ring. The bark is perfect. I mean, it's coming apart under its own weight. Gorgeous. So, select brisket, the lowest quality. Went for that really long stall period, and it really was the best part of 11-12 hours. Made some pretty fine brisket. So if you got the time and inclination to battle away with select, it really is good. And I say HEB is knocking this out very cheaply right now. So